So I just want to take a moment and welcome everybody. If this is your first BunkerLit episode, welcome. We are thrilled to hear tonight from CB Bernhard or Chris, depending on how you know him. The whole idea of the BunkerLit reading series is a way to kind of infuse every week with 30 minutes of succinct, artful kind of exchange. So we have a writer that will read for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then there's a question and answer period. If you have questions, you can either unmute your mic and share them, or there's a text box as well if that's easier for you. And we like to just exchange a little bit with the author. And then the idea is that we close out at 8:30. So it's not too much of a time commitment for anybody, but it's just a really beautiful way to come together as a writing community and just as a community of individuals, both here and kind of globally. So Brendan is going to introduce tonight. If you could just take a second down in the bottom of your screen, if you could mute your mic, that way it doesn't interrupt the reading if you bump into anything or cough or anything like that. And then unmute as soon as we open to the Q&A, and that'll allow you to kind of exchange. Thanks.
So I first met Chris. I was thinking about it, Chris. I think it was maybe fall of 1998, maybe when you came to Sitka.
Yeah, it was July 99.
Okay, there it is, July of 99. I had been reporting for the Daily Sitka Sentinel, and here comes this bristly guy from New Hampshire in these worn Carhartts with this wide smile, and we went to this hotel called the Sciatica. We had a couple beers and spoke of writing and the dogs we would get and the trips we would take and all sorts of things. Chris went on to buy a boat of his own. This is before I had a boat. I followed in his footsteps, and then he came out with the book, Chasing Alaska, in which I'm sure a lot of you guys have read it, and he wrote of his distant relative, Joe Bernard. And the book killed it. It was Publisher's Weekly Top 10 Travel Pick. It was an Amazon bestseller, finalist for 2014 Oregon Book Award. And along with that, Chris has written for a number of different journals and publications: Gray's Sporting Journal, Catapult, Bear Deluxe, the Adirondack Review. Chris recently left Portland, where I had the great pleasure to stay with him a couple times. He moved with his wife and his great dog Shakes. And I always remember when I would stay with you, Chris, I would wake to the sound of coffee being made at 5:30 or whatever, as you had your regular writing schedule.
You're lucky that's the sound you woke to in my house.
Yeah. And I don't know. I know that he's been working on a new novel. I'm hoping he'll perhaps share it with us tonight. And Chris is somebody I deeply admire as a friend, as a writer, somebody silly enough to love wooden boats. And Chris, it is a great pleasure to have you here on BunkerLit.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to thank Brendan and Amy for hosting this series and for inviting me to it. And I want to thank all of you for coming. I know the country's in lockdown and your options are limited, but you chose this over Netflix, and I appreciate that. And suck it, Tiger King. They say the secret to successful public speaking is to picture your audience naked. I just want to say that with all the Zoom mishaps I've been hearing about in the news, I know that I may not need to use my imagination for that tonight. So I'm going to ask you all to exercise situational awareness with your webcam this entire evening. I appreciate it. Brendan mentioned my last book, Chasing Alaska, nonfiction. The new one is a novel. I sent it to my agent a couple of months ago, and she started shopping it around just as a pandemic sort of ripped the world inside out. Maybe it's a terrible time to be shopping a book around. I don't know. I guess we'll see. But I am going to read from it tonight for the first time. And let me say that while the world is in such disarray, so many things are so awful for so many people, I wanted to choose something light and upbeat to cheer you up. But I don't write anything like that. So this book is set in a town called Disappointment, Oregon, which is the only thing you need to know about it. Lewis tried to hide his fear from his father as he approached the animal. The trap had torn its leg half off and left its fur spattered with blood. It bared its teeth and hissed, arching its back, scraping the ground with long claws. It studied him with black eyes, frantic with thirst, with hunger, with the terror that had possessed it since the steel jaw bit down on its hindquarter. When it lunged, Lewis flinched, stumbling backwards and falling in the dirt at his father's feet. But the trap was chained to a stake. The animal could not reach him. "What is it?" he asked. His father spit on the ground beside him and lit a cigarette. "Mink." Foam gathered around the animal's mouth as it thrashed the chain, trying to get at them. They'd set the trap near a trout stream last weekend and had returned to check it. Lewis wished he had not run ahead of his father on the trail. The mink had seen him first, which made him responsible for its suffering, or at least complicit. "We have to help it," he said. In response, his father smacked him with the back of his hand, hard enough to darken his vision. "The hell we do. What the hell you think we set the trap for in the first place?" The old man spit again. He was forever spitting, wads of phlegm yellowed with nicotine and whatever it was inside him that so bittered his world. The chain rattled as the mink threw itself at the brush, no longer trying to attack now, but trying to flee. Their arrival had worsened its fear. With each lunge, the steel teeth bit deeper into its leg, peeling back fur and exposing flesh and then bone. They watched it turn on itself in a fury, chewing at its trapped leg until its face and ears were covered with blood, too. "Look what it will do to itself," his father said, sounding amused. "That's how bad it wants to escape." "Shit." He drew the word out into an appreciative sigh. "Even if it gets away, there won't be nothing left of it." As suddenly as if it had understood, the mink stopped fighting and lay flat on its side. Matted with dirt and leaves, its filthy coat rose and fell with each diminished breath. Lewis knew the collective nouns for most animals, a muster of peacocks, a sleuth of bears. Terms of venery they were called, but he couldn't remember the name for a group of mink. There wasn't one. They're solitary animals. "We have to let it go," he said again. He knew it might draw him another fist, but his father just looked at him. "Don't be that guy," he said. It was something he said all the time, pointing at a car that cut them off in traffic, a man holding his wife's purse in the grocery store, a street corner beggar in tattered clothes. He took a drag from his cigarette, exhaling through narrowed lips and nostrils. Squinting through the smoke, he shook his head slowly and flicked the cigarette butt at Lewis. It exploded against the fabric of his shirt in a flurry of sparks. Leaning his fly rod carefully against a maple red with autumn, his father took off his vest. The vest had more pockets than Lewis could count. A fleece patch where the heart should be, decorated with brightly colored trout flies. The hooks flashed in the sun like the medals of an army general. He turned the vest inside out, wrapped it around his hand, and approached the mink. Its visible eye flashed something, fear maybe, but the mink had worn itself out, was too tired to move. The chain stretched taut to the stake behind it, making a straight line, the head of an arrow pointing deep into the woods, an arrow pointing to freedom. His father squatted close and reached down slowly with the vest, grabbing the mink behind the head with one quick movement, lifting it in front of him, taking the tension from the chain. "Coat's still decent," he said, turning the body around to appraise it. "Even with the leg, it's worth something." "Are you going to let it go?" Lewis asked. His father looked at him as if he was a trap closed around his leg. When he put his other hand on the mink, it was almost the length of the animal. Tracing a line up the mink's belly to its small chest, he felt around, dug two long fingers into the fur, and squeezed. The mink went limp in his hand. "If you pinch the heart, you kill it without leaving any marks," he said. "My own father taught me that, just like his father taught him. And now I'm teaching you." The chain rattled as he dropped the dead animal onto the ground. "Maybe someday you'll teach your own son too," he said, though his expression made clear that he didn't see any more reason to hope for such a thing than he did to hope for anything at all. Remembering that day and remembering the old man as he watches the obstetrician at the foot of his wife's hospital bed, Lewis wonders if there's anything crueler than hope. The doctor has thin wrists, slender fingers, hands you wouldn't trust to hold your drink. But he's delivered most of the babies born in the county over the last half-century and claims to have only dropped a few. Strike one, he says, affecting an umpire's booming drawl as he catches the baby with hands cupped between Janie's legs. Lewis, now a fly fishing guide and a long time gone from that day on the river with his father, brushes aside the analogy with one of his own. A keeper, he says, smiling at his wife. She's still panting for breath, knees up on the bed in front of her, red hair fanned over the pillow like flames. He came right to the boat, he said. She did, the doctor says. She? Lewis is confused. Congratulations, Mr. Yaw, you have a beautiful baby girl. A girl? I can show you how to tell the difference if you like, Mr. Yaw. Janie laughs, but it's not effortless. Laid bare by the delivery, by the drugs they've administered, her voice betrays her worry. Is she healthy? Lewis peers down at the table where the nurse, a substantial woman with ankles thick as coffee cans, is swaddling their daughter, womb slick and wide-eyed like a caught fish. He wanted a son to teach everything he knows, to fish and to fight, a son to teach what it means to be a man, not just a man, but the kind of man people count on. How did it never occur to him that he might get a daughter instead? Lewis, is she healthy? He looks at the baby again. She's already stopped crying and grins brightly through the slime of vernix, as if enjoying herself very much. Yes, he tries to say, but nearly chokes on it, on the hope. Babies can't even support the weight of their own heads. How can he expect this one to bear the burden of so much hope? Fearing it will crush her if she discovers it, he tries to keep it to himself, to contain it. Already working to protect this little girl, this plump, pale raisin pulled from between his wife's legs, utterly helpless, reliant upon the very world he hopes she might someday change. A girl, Janie says. Though her voice is still breathless, dazed, there's humor in it now. Relief. Aw, Lewis, you're outnumbered. He'd been reluctant to have a child at all. Why bring someone into a world so comfortable with its own heartlessness? Why risk passing on his own family's legacy of failure and disappointment? This baby might be the only thing Janie ever wanted. It's the only thing she ever asked of him. A child of her own, a family, a means to restore the balance, reparations for her own unforgivable childhood, and for his too. But he's less sure it works that way, less sure either of them can ever make amends for the things their own parents did to them. All they can do is try not to make the same mistakes, or worse ones, and that part at least ought to be a breeze. Then a rumble of thunder reaches them, even there, deep inside the small hospital, and he feels it as a low and sustained growl in his gut. The hair on his neck stands at attention, and when the lights in the room flicker and dim, his confidence does too, a reminder that the darkness can find him anywhere. That's just a storm, the doctor says. Not to worry. The emergency generators should kick on at any moment. And a fraction of a second later, they do. Just like that, the light is restored. She's beautiful, isn't she? The nurse asks, holding up his daughter. Lewis looks at her closely. Not at all, he thinks. She's a constipation of wrinkles, a tumbleweed of hair. She's not beautiful. But when she smiles, he cannot deny the appeal of her gummy grin, as if she considers her own arrival the punchline to a joke 9 months in the telling, the thunder, a perfectly timed rim shot. I thought we were having a boy, he says. There are so many things I wanted to teach him. I don't know what to do with a girl. The nurse looks at him with something like impatience. Teach her all the same things. She'll be even better at them. Maybe he's had it wrong, he thinks, realizing for the first time how much a daughter can teach him, how much he can learn from her. This little girl can soften his edges, which Janie says are sharp enough to saw wood. This little girl will demand those parts of him that he keeps locked away. They'll teach each other everything he and his own father never learned together. All he has to do is not screw her up. All he has to do is not let her down. What do you think, Lewis? Janie asks as the nurse hands her their ungainly baby. Does she look like me? Lewis had been a moderately successful heavyweight before he gave up boxing to be with Janie, trading his fists for fishing, the ring for the river. Though it's been a few years, he still knows how and when to pull a punch. so he smiles upon his wife with love, but does not answer the question. That's it. First reading from the book. You're all muted. I'm just going to assume you're clapping voraciously.
Chris, that was absolutely, I mean, beautiful in terms of the writings and the craft there, but also like, I feel completely shook with how much I felt for that mink and that like the intensity of that scene. Was
No, I
fantastic.
appreciate that.
It was
Thank
fantastic.
you. Anybody else?
If that's true, that's the first time you've read from the new book, read aloud?
There was a reading in Newport, Oregon about 6 years ago where I read maybe 2 pages from what was then a scene, but it's, you know, it wasn't even a book then, wasn't sure it would be. So yeah, that's the first time. And Brendan, you know how I am with reading new work.
I know. Trying to get you to send me stuff. Well, thank you. It was awesome. Feel honored to have heard it.
Well, I'm honored for the chance to debut it. Yeah. Take it out, dust it off, and hold it up.
Her arrival was a joke 9 months in the telling.
Yeah. Yeah. And questions? No. Wow. You guys are easy.
And guys, Zoom's kind of crazy. You can also type your questions in the comments if that works better. Because I couldn't stop thinking of Carousel. Did you ever see that Rogers and Hammerstein? I think
No.
it was like a soliloquy. You know, what if it's a girl? It's this guy who's so bent on having a boy, and then all of a sudden.
I was wondering how you were going to take that trapping scene and relate it to a musical.
No, I don't. The trapping scene, I can't do anything with that. But yeah, the pivot from trapping to having a kid was unexpected and wonderful.
Hey, Kristen's here. Hey, Kristen. Jeannie's here.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's incredible to hear new work from you. I'm just sort of curious, like, because you were such a disciplined editor and reviser of work, was there a character that you felt changed the most from the inception of this this story and this idea to what it looks like today?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It would either be the 8 characters that I cut from the text completely and killed off, or the daughter, which was a son in the first 37 drafts of the book. Does that answer the question? I hate talking about this. I fundamentally misunderstood what the book was about the first time I wrote it. And as my wife will tell you, I was under the delusion that it was a comedy, and it turned out to be one of the darkest damn things I've ever written. But the first draft was a comedy, and it was wildly unfunny and about 450,000 words longer than it needed to be. And it's changed quite a bit. I see a question here. Oh, thanks, Jeannie.
I'm kind of curious, considering obviously that first book was nonfiction, sort of what made you want to write a novel and sort of how you came into that process. Did you find it was, I mean, I'm just always interested in writers that dabble in more than one genre. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. The questions are getting harder. I was wrong. So I wrote 2 novels first, which failed to sell. I signed my agent with the first one, and she put it in front of just about every editor on this planet, and it still failed to sell. And it was heartbreaking. And a similar thing happened with the next one. We had some near misses. And while we were waiting to hear on that, she sold the proposal for Chasing Alaska. So the surprise was not that I wrote fiction. The surprise was that I wrote a nonfiction book.
Okay.
And I went, the day I delivered Chasing Alaska manuscript to the editor, I started the novel that eventually became the one she's shopping around now. So I've always made a career writing nonfiction, but my heart has always been writing fiction. I just am not as good at it, apparently, or not as successful at it, let's say. We all know that success is not a measure of goodness, or at least that's what we all tell ourselves as writers.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Kristen. Good to
How
see
are
you.
you? That was wonderful.
Speaking of fiction writers, Kristen has a new novel coming out.
I do, in November. But my question for you is disappointment a real place?
Only in my heart, Kristen.
Excellent. It's a great name for a place.
Thank you. The working draft of the book for years was Disappointment, Oregon. And then when we started packaging it up, some of the feedback was that's too depressing a name and it will not help your chances.
Gotcha.
But I like it.
It fits perfectly.
It does fit perfectly. And
Yeah.
it's, if you've spent time in Oregon, it's not hard to imagine a place called Disappointment, Oregon.
Cool.
Forgive me, Chris, if you said this, but what is the title that you're using as you shop it around?
Small Animals Caught in Traps.
I like that.
And that's not depressing at all, Chris. Just to say.
Yeah. All right. That's a fair point. Did I invite you? Other questions? I see some. I can't read the chat here without my glasses on.
So Chris, where does this, was this the opening scene that you read, or where was this in the book?
Yes, this is the first half of the first chapter.
So yeah, so you grab us by the throat right at the start. That's a pretty effective opening, I'd say.
Thank you. It's either an off-putting opening or it's a grabber. Yeah, it's unclear which at this point.
Will we, I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
Go ahead, John.
Will we get to see the relationship between the guy and his daughter grow over a long period of time, or a year, or?
A long period of time. Yeah. It's the first draft of the book. It was like an epic generational saga. It didn't work, but you do get to see their relationship together as they grow. Yeah, it's kind of that's a key part of the story for me. Yeah.
I think she's right. It really grabs. Like I already want to know more about this guy. Like, did he turn out like his dad, and all all that. So it's effective. Very good.
Oh, thanks. That is the question. Yeah.
So I think Kurt has a question that I was actually curious about too. He asked in the comments how many pages is the novel, or how many words?
It's right about 70,000, I think. Just slightly shorter than its original 520,000.
Right.
Which was, even by David Foster Wallace standards, was long, considering none of it was footnotes.
Yeah. And if you see her, since you're going blind over there, I'll read Jeannie's iPhone. Can you talk a little bit about your process, Chris? How do drafts work for you?
They don't work well. How do drafts work for me? I'm gonna misquote him here, but James Michener said something like, "I'm an okay writer. I'm an excellent rewriter," and that very much is my process. I just try and. Brandon, remember Richard Nelson? He died last year, I think. Really sweet guy, great writer. I interviewed him once for a story, and he had a note on his taped to his monitor that said, "Just put it down on the page, clean it up later." And that made so much sense to me. I tend to get in my own way. So I try and just write the first draft and then really go back and rewrite it. I finished the first draft of this book in, Kim could tell us for sure, but I want to say like 2013, just to show you how much rewriting is part of the process here. It has really been gutting and rebuilding and gutting and rebuilding. And I fundamentally misunderstood what this book was about the first time I wrote it. I keep saying that, but it's true. And I ended up deleting it and writing it again after it was a comedy, and then changing the point of view and changing the time frame and changing the characters and the voice. And eventually I had to call it done. But I feel like this is the one that either I'm going to finish it or it's going to finish me, and it was a close race, which it was going to be. So drafts are hard. Revision is a huge part of my process, and I'm just going to keep going on about that until somebody asks something else or interrupts me.
Chris, how many drafts before you shared any of it with anyone? Just wondering.
Maybe 40. And that was the one I shared with you, Kate, which was probably 3-4 years ago. So quite a few.
Chris,
Yes. Hi,
Ellen
Ellen.
up here.
Hey,
How are
Spencer.
you? It's
Good.
Betsy.
Nice to see the two of you. Yeah.
It's great to see you. We miss you in Sitka. Hey, I want to ask you, I love you, how self-deprecating you are. It's lovely. I love that the town has made disappointment, but when do you feel most excited, most undisappointed when you're in your writing process?
Where or when?
When? At what part in the arc, in the journey?
It's funny. The easy answer is that when I'm done with it, but that's not true. I think I really enjoy being in there and fiddling with it. I really enjoy sort of cracking the spine on a sentence and rebuilding it and trying to solve it like it's a puzzle or a mystery. And when you get it right, it resonates like a tuning fork. It hits you and you can feel it just harmonizing with everything within you. And that is the moment when it works for me. And I think that's when I'm happiest with the writing process. It's not when I'm sharing it with other people. It's not getting feedback. For me, writing is it's a very isolated, it's weird. Brendan and I have this ongoing argument because he loves to share work with people as soon as it's new. And I don't. You have to pry it out of me, because once I share it with somebody else, it loses some of its magic for me. It ceases to become just this thing within me, and it becomes sort of this shared thing. And obviously that's an important part of writing, and I do value that, but I always want to postpone that moment as long as possible. It's weird. I mean, writing's not like, it's not like being an electrician where there's a qualifying exam or a certification. There's not somebody who comes and gives you an inspection. You don't need to be licensed to do it, but it's also not a black art like some people would have you believe. It's just it's digging ditches. You got to put in the work. You got to get the calluses. You got to get the sore back, and you got to move the dirt. And that's what it is for me. And there's definitely some pleasure to be had from that kind of mental manual labor.
Well, very well put, and I can't wait to read more of the book. You got me caught. I
Oh,
loved
thanks,
your.
Ellen. I appreciate that. It's good, so good to see you too. Are there more questions that somebody else can read me? No, it's not Old Crow. So Kurt asked the question if I'm drinking Old Crow, which is funny because Lewis in the book is a big drinker of Old Crow. It's not Old Crow. This is actually Buffalo Trace, which is Brendan's bourbon. Cape Disappointment, right? Benjamin Ficklin points out here that there is a Cape Disappointment in Oregon, which is great. Are there other questions? My eyes aren't good enough to read all of those.
I think we're just trying to figure out what you're drinking. Yeah, if somebody wants to ask a last question, then we'll close it up.
I have one.
All right.
What are you working on now?
You always go for the throat, huh? I have found, it's funny, this pandemic has, I'm not writing during it. I was talking to Armin about this and our friend Kate recently. I'm not writing during this. I feel like it's a self-care thing for me to take a little bit of a break from it. So what I'm doing instead of writing during this is somebody gave me a 60-year-old wooden boat that had been built in Minnesota and lived in Alaska for 35 years. And I'm using my quarantine period to try and save and restore this boat. And I'm finding the manual labor involved in that to be exhausting and rewarding in a very different but very similar way to writing. And I feel like it's playing the same role that writing does for me. It's tiring me out and fulfilling me. And I look forward to going back to the novel I had been working on before this whole thing happened. But I feel like I'm not in a rush for it right now. It's okay, taking a break. I always tell other writers when they ask questions, you got to give yourself permission to write, but sometimes you also need to give yourself permission not to write. And I feel like I'm in that stage of it.
Well, I think when you find the headspace for it, you should probably write an essay about that process of the boat and the writing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see which one has more holes in it.
Good luck.
Thanks, Kristen. It's good to see you. I look forward to your new novel.
Thank you guys so much for showing up tonight. I hope everybody is, happy and staying safe and kind of, looking toward the future, and, everybody getting together here. I know it makes a huge difference in my day and my night. And thank you so much for joining us, Chris. I can't wait to read the rest of your book. I think it's going to be a winner. I can't wait till somebody comes to their senses and buys that thing.
Thanks. Thank you, and Amy, for hosting this. Thank you all for coming out for this. Seriously, I know we joke about it, but yeah, you guys are the best. I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah, and Chris, I just want to add, I know how vulnerable it can be to share something new, but from my end, this has been my favorite of the episodes we've done so far. That was just really fantastic. So
Thanks
you
so much, Amy. I really
going out
appreciate
on a
it.
limb and sharing that with us.
Thank you so much. That's really kind. I appreciate it. And maybe I'm going to reach out to you by email and we can talk a little bit about your book.
Mother Trucker.
Mother Trucker.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week, Wednesday at 8. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.